The night she told me she was leaving, she expected a completely different reaction. I could see it in the way she stood there in the living room, arms folded, chin slightly raised, like someone bracing for a storm but secretly hoping the storm would prove how important she was. The suitcase beside her wasn't even fully zipped. A few pieces of clothing were sticking out, like she had packed it in a rush but still wanted it to look dramatic. Outside, it was one of those quiet suburban nights where everything feels frozen. Streetlights glowing soft yellow, lawns freshly cut, a dog barking somewhere 2 houses down. Our neighborhood in northern Colorado was usually calm enough that you could hear someone's garage door open from half a block away. Inside our house, though, the air felt heavy. Her name was Lindsay. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 11. Met back when we were both 24, working at the same marketing firm in Denver. She had that confident, effortless energy that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. Blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, always dressed just a little more polished than everyone else. Back then I thought it meant she had ambition. Now I realize it also meant she needed attention like oxygen. I was sitting on the couch when she dropped the words, "I can't do this anymore, Daniel." The lines sounded rehearsed, too clean, too calm. I looked up from the coffee table where my laptop was still open. I had been answering emails from work, but honestly, I'd been expecting something like this for weeks, maybe months. The fights had gotten strange lately. Not explosive, not even loud, just this quiet tension that hung between us like smoke after a fire. "What can't you do anymore?" I asked. She rolled her eyes a little, like the answer should have been obvious. "This marriage." I leaned back against the couch and studied her face. She wasn't crying. That stood out immediately. When people end something that actually hurts them, their emotions spill out whether they want them to or not. Lindsay looked controlled, almost impatient, like she wanted to skip ahead to the part where I started begging. "You're leaving tonight?" I asked. Her gaze flicked to the suitcase. "I think it's best." Best. Another word that sounded carefully selected. We sat there in silence for a few seconds. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and a car passing slowly outside. I should explain something. 3 weeks earlier, I had learned something about my wife that completely rewired the way I looked at her. Before that moment, this conversation would have destroyed me. But now it just felt like a scene I'd already watched play out in my head 100 times. "You're not going to ask why?" she said finally. Her voice had a little edge to it now. I shrugged slightly. "If you want to tell me, you'll tell me." That clearly wasn't the response she expected. She shifted her weight, arms tightening across her chest. "I'm not happy, Daniel." Another rehearsed line. "Okay." Her eyes narrowed. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" She took a step forward. "I thought maybe you'd fight for us." There it was. The real script she had imagined. The part where I stand up, panic in my voice, promise to change, ask what I did wrong, maybe even blame myself for pushing her away. Instead, I just watched her. "I'm not going to fight someone who already decided to leave," I said. The room went quiet again. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Confusion. Almost annoyance. "You're just giving up?" she asked. I let out a slow breath. "No. I think you already did that." Her jaw tightened. "Wow." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's really cold." Maybe it was. But the truth is, the coldness had started the moment I saw the text message on her phone. It happened on a random Sunday afternoon. She had been in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee. Normally, I wouldn't look. I never had. But the message preview popped up on the screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped instantly. The contact name was Ryan. No last name, just Ryan. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. Once it grabs you, there's no turning back. I picked up the phone. The conversation thread opened to weeks of messages. Flirting, inside jokes, late night plans, and eventually things that made my chest feel hollow. Hotel addresses, pictures, messages about how he understands me in a way Daniel never did. I remember standing there in the kitchen, staring at the screen while the shower ran upstairs. The smell of coffee filled the room, but suddenly made me feel nauseous. It wasn't just the cheating. It was how normal she sounded with him. How alive. Like our entire marriage had been some boring waiting room before the real show started. I didn't confront her that day, or the next. Instead, I watched. Paid attention to details I had ignored before.
The late work meetings, the sudden interest in going to the gym at 8 p.m., the way she started guarding her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth assembled itself. Ryan was a guy from her office, 32, recently divorced. According to LinkedIn, he had joined her company about 6 months earlier, about the same time Lindsay started coming home later. Funny how patterns reveal themselves when you finally start looking. Back in the living room, Lindsay was staring at me like she couldn't quite process what was happening. "You don't seem very upset," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "What would upset look like?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Something." A strange calm had settled over me. "I guess I just figured if you're done, you're done." She walked closer, frustration building. "That's not how marriage works." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievably ironic. "Isn't it?" I said quietly. She stopped about 6 feet away from me. "You're acting like you don't even care." That line hit something inside me, but I kept my face neutral. "Oh, I care," I said. "You have a weird way of showing it." Maybe. Or maybe I had already gone through the worst part alone, 3 weeks earlier, standing in my kitchen with her phone in my hand. Once the truth detonates inside your life like that, the aftermath becomes strangely quiet. The shock burns everything down. What's left afterward is mostly ash. She gestured toward the suitcase. "I'm leaving, Daniel. I see that. Say something." So I did. "Do you want help carrying that to the car?" The look on her face was priceless. Pure disbelief. "You're unbelievable," she said. I stood up slowly from the couch. She stepped back slightly, probably expecting me to start arguing or blocking the door. Instead, I walked past her, down the short hallway toward the front entrance. My hand reached for the handle. Behind me, I could hear her breathing quicken. "What are you doing?" she asked. I opened the door. Cool night air drifted inside. Then I stepped aside and gestured toward the driveway. "If you're leaving," I said calmly, "you should probably go." For a second, she didn't move. She just stared at me like I had shattered some invisible rule she thought every husband followed. "You're seriously just letting me walk out?" I met her eyes. "Yes." Her expression hardened. "Fine."
She grabbed the suitcase handle and dragged it across the hardwood floor, wheels rattling loudly in the quiet house. When she passed me, I caught a faint scent of her perfume, the same one she used on our wedding night. She walked out onto the porch, but right before stepping off, she turned back toward me. I could see something brewing behind her eyes now, anger, or maybe something closer to panic. "You're going to regret this," she said. I leaned lightly against the doorframe. Regret what? Not fighting for me. For the first time that night, I almost told her, almost said the words, "I know about Ryan." But something stopped me. Instead, I just said, "Good night, Lindsay." Her face flushed. Then she spun around and walked down the steps toward her car. The engine started seconds later. Headlights washed across the front yard. And just like that, my wife drove away. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know yet, was that the story she thought she was writing tonight had a completely different ending waiting for her. And she was going to find out sooner than she expected. The house felt strange after Lindsay drove away. Not empty exactly, just quiet in a way that made every little sound seem louder than it should have been. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the faint ticking of the thermostat, the wind brushing softly against the siding outside. I stood there in the doorway for a minute after her taillights disappeared down the street. 11 years together, and the ending had taken less than 10 minutes. No screaming, no tears, no dramatic collapse. Just a suitcase rolling across hardwood floors and a car engine fading into the distance. I closed the door and locked it out of habit. Then I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch again, exactly where I had been before she announced she was leaving. My laptop was still open on the coffee table. The email draft I'd been pretending to write was still sitting there unfinished. But I wasn't thinking about work. I was thinking about Ryan. Specifically, I was thinking about the first time I saw his face. It had been 2 weeks earlier, during a company happy hour Lindsay invited me to. She said it was just a casual thing, coworkers grabbing drinks at a bar downtown after work. I almost didn't go, but she insisted. Looking back, I think she assumed I'd say no. The bar was packed that night, loud music, people standing shoulder to shoulder,
everyone half shouting over each other while holding craft beers and cocktails. Lindsay introduced me to a few people from her department, but I could tell she was distracted. Her eyes kept drifting around the room like she was waiting for someone. Then he walked in. Tall guy, dark hair, clean cut, confident posture. The kind of guy who knew he was attractive without having to show off about it. Ryan. The moment Lindsay spotted him, her entire energy changed. It was subtle, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. Her shoulders straightened, her smile got brighter, her voice lifted just a little. When she introduced us, she was almost giddy. "Daniel, this is Ryan. He just joined a strategy team." Ryan shook my hand firmly. "Nice to finally meet you, man. Lindsay talks about you all the time." At the time, that sentence reassured me. Now I realize it was probably the easiest lie he told that night. They spent a lot of that evening standing near each other, not touching, but always close. Leaning in when the other talked, sharing little comments under their breath that made them laugh. That quiet kind of connection people usually only develop after a lot of time together. At one point, I watched Lindsay place her hand lightly on his arm while she laughed at something he said. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but something about it lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter. When we drove home that night, I asked casually, "So Ryan seems cool?" "Yeah," she said quickly. "He's new, but he's good at what he does." That was it. Conversation over. But 2 weeks later, standing in the kitchen with her phone in my hand, that memory came rushing back like a missing puzzle piece finally snapping into place. Back in the present, I leaned forward and closed the laptop. The house felt different now. Not sad, not even angry, just clear, like the fog had finally lifted. I stood up and walked upstairs to the bedroom Lindsay and I had shared for almost a decade. Her side of the closet was half empty. She hadn't taken much tonight, just a suitcase worth of clothes and a few toiletries. Most of her things were still here, which told me something important. She didn't actually think this was the end. This was supposed to be a move in a game, a dramatic exit designed to trigger a reaction from me, begging, apologizing, chasing after her. Instead, I opened the door and let her walk out. That wasn't part of the script she had written in her head. I pulled out my phone and checked the time, 9:47 p.m. Then I opened a contact near the top of my messages. The name read, Mark. Mark had been my best friend since college. We'd lived together for 3 years in a crappy apartment in Boulder back when we were both broke and working entry-level jobs. He was also a private investigator now. Life takes weird turns like that sometimes. When I first found Lindsay's messages with Ryan, I didn't know what to do with the information. Confronting her right away felt pointless without understanding how deep things went, so I called Mark. At first, he thought I was joking. "You want me to investigate your wife?" he asked. "I want to know the truth," I said. There was a long pause on the phone, then he sighed. "All right, but you might not like what I find." Turns out he was right. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, a text from Mark. "You still up?" I typed back immediately. "Yeah." 3 dots appeared, then another message. "Did she leave?" I stared at the screen for a second. "Yeah, about 15 minutes ago." His response came fast. "Wow." Then another bubble appeared. "So, you want the update now?" My chest tightened slightly. I had asked him to dig into Ryan as well, not just Lindsay's movements. Everything, I told him at the time. I want to know who this guy actually is. At first it felt obsessive, now it felt necessary. I typed one word. "Yes." Mark didn't text the details, instead my phone rang. I answered. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "So, first of all, you okay?" "Yeah." "You sound calm for a guy whose wife just walked out." "I think I already had my meltdown 3 weeks ago." "Fair enough." I leaned against the dresser and waited. Mark exhaled slowly on the other end. "All right, so here's the thing about Ryan." Something in his tone immediately told me this wasn't going where I expected. "What about him?" I asked. "Well, the story he tells people at the office is technically true." "Which is?" "Recently divorced, moved here from Arizona, fresh start." That matched everything Lindsay had said. "But?" I asked. Mark chuckled darkly. "But that's not the full picture." I felt my pulse start to pick up. "What's missing?" "His divorce happened 6 months ago," Mark said. "But the reason it happened isn't exactly public knowledge." I waited. Mark continued. "His ex-wife filed after catching him in an affair." I closed my eyes briefly. "Of course. Just one?" I asked. "That's the interesting part," Mark said. "No."
I straightened. "Ryan has a pattern, Daniel." "How bad?" Mark didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded almost impressed. "In the last 5 years, I found evidence of at least 4 different relationships that started while he was already with someone else. 4. I ran a hand through my hair. "So he cheats," I said. "That's not exactly rare." "True," Mark said. "But here's the part you're really not going to like." My stomach tightened. "What?" "He doesn't just cheat." Another pause. "He targets married women." The words landed heavy. "What do you mean, targets?" I asked slowly. "I mean," Mark said, "every single one of those affairs involved women who were already married." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Why?" I asked. Mark let out a short breath. "Based on the messages I managed to pull and a few conversations I had, he likes the thrill." "The thrill?" "Yeah. Breaking up marriages, being the guy they choose over their husbands." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mark added something that made my blood run cold. "And Daniel, there's one more thing." "What?" "The last husband who confronted him ended up getting arrested." My head snapped up. Arrested? Ryan filed a harassment complaint, said the guy threatened him. I stared at the floor. That's convenient? Very. Another long silence filled the call. Finally, Mark said quietly, "Look, I don't want to tell you what to do, but if Lindsay thinks this guy is her big romantic escape," "Yeah," I said, "she's walking into a disaster." I walked slowly over to the bedroom window and looked out at the dark street. Somewhere out there, my wife was probably driving toward the man she thought she was leaving me for, the man she believed was her future. "Mark," I said. "Yeah?" "Send me everything you found." "You sure?" "Yeah." Another pause. Then he said, "All right, but Daniel, what are you planning to do with it?" I watched a car pass slowly under the streetlight outside. The truth was, I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning a confrontation, but I also wasn't planning to protect Lindsay from the consequences of her choices anymore. "I'm not going to do anything," I said. "Then why do you want it?" I thought about Lindsay standing on the porch earlier, telling me I'd regret not fighting for her. "She's convinced she's walking into a better life," I said quietly. Mark didn't respond. "So if that's what she wants," I continued, "she deserves to see exactly what that life looks like." I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset. Strangely, I wasn't. The heavy wave of shock and grief had already hit me weeks earlier when I first discovered Lindsay's messages with Ryan. What remained now was something quieter. Clarity. Around midnight, Mark sent the files. A folder full of screenshots, background reports, and a short summary he wrote explaining Ryan's history. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling slowly through everything. The pattern was disturbingly consistent. Ryan would meet a woman through work or mutual friends. Most of them were married or in long-term relationships. He'd start with harmless flirting, build emotional intimacy, position himself as the guy who really understood them. Then the affair would begin. In 3 of the cases Mark found, the marriages collapsed within months. In one case, the husband confronted Ryan outside a restaurant. That incident ended with police involvement and a restraining order filed against the husband. Ryan walked away clean. It wasn't illegal to be a manipulative jerk. I closed the laptop around 1:30 a.m. and just sat there in the quiet kitchen. For years, Lindsay had accused me of being too calm during arguments, too measured. She used to say it was like trying to fight a wall. But the truth is, I feel things deeply. I just process them differently. Explosions burn fast. Silence burns slow. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. I knew it would come eventually. The message was short. "I'm staying at Ryan's tonight." No apology, no explanation, just a statement. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Okay." 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. She was clearly expecting a bigger reaction. Finally, another message came. "That's all you're going to say?" I leaned back in my chair. Part of me wondered if Ryan was sitting nearby watching this unfold. Maybe Lindsay had told him how I would probably lose my mind when she left. Maybe they were both waiting for angry texts. Instead, I wrote, "What would you like me to say?" Her response came slower this time. "I don't know. Something." I thought about that word again. Something. People say that when they're not actually sure what they want, only that they want attention. I set the phone down without replying. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. "You're acting like you don't care at all." I read the message and felt an odd mix of emotions. Not anger, not sadness, more like distance. I picked up the phone and typed one final reply. "You made your choice tonight, Lindsay." Then I turned the phone face down on the table and went upstairs. The next morning felt surreal. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows like it always did. The same neighborhood sounds drifted in from outside. Garbage trucks, distant lawnmowers, kids waiting for the school bus. But the bed beside me was empty. I showered, got dressed, and made coffee like it was any other weekday. Routine can be grounding when your life starts shifting under your feet. Around 8:30, my phone rang. Mark again. "Morning," he said. "Morning. You sound like a guy ordering breakfast, not a guy whose wife moved out." I slept surprisingly well. "Either you're handling this incredibly well," Mark said, "or the emotional crash is going to be catastrophic later." "Maybe." I poured coffee into a mug. "Did she contact you?" he asked. "Yeah. She's staying at Ryan's." "Of course she is." We both went quiet for a second. Then Mark asked, "So what's the plan now?" "I go to work," I said. "That's it?" "That's it." "You're not going to confront her with the information?" "No." "Not even warn her?" I looked out the kitchen window at the quiet street. "She's an adult," I said. "She made her decision." Mark sighed softly. "You're a better man than most people I know." I almost laughed at that. "No," I thought. "I'm just tired." When you've spent weeks mentally preparing for something, the moment itself rarely feels dramatic. It just arrives. Work that day was strangely normal. Emails, meetings, the usual chaos of deadlines and clients. Only one person at the office knew what was happening. My boss, Greg.
I told him in private that Lindsay and I were separating, just in case anything personal spilled into work life. Greg was in his early 50s, divorced himself, the kind of guy who had seen enough life to not overreact. Sorry to hear that, he said. Yeah. Amicable? I hesitated. Not exactly. He nodded like he understood. Take whatever time you need if things get messy, he said. But things didn't get messy, at least not right away. Around lunchtime, I checked my phone and saw a few more texts from Lindsay. They had a slightly different tone now. Did you tell anyone? Another message below it. Are you at work? Then a third. Ryan says you're taking this really weirdly. That one made me pause. Ryan says.
So they had definitely talked about me. I imagined them sitting in his apartment kitchen, Lindsay explaining how I barely reacted when she left. Maybe Ryan was giving her advice about how I'd eventually break down. Maybe he was telling her not to worry. I typed a simple reply. I told my boss we're separating. A minute later, she responded. Separating? I could almost hear the tension behind that word. Yes. A few minutes passed. Then, so that's it? You're already telling people? I stared at the screen. What did she expect? That I'd pretend everything was normal? Another message came. You're not even trying to fix this. I thought about responding, but there was nothing productive to say, because the truth was simple. You can't fix something the other person has already abandoned. I put the phone away and finished my lunch. That evening, when I got home, the house felt even quieter than the night before. Lindsay hadn't returned. No surprise there. But something else had happened. Her sister Emily was sitting on my front porch. I noticed her the moment I pulled into the driveway. She stood up as soon as I got out of the car. Emily and Lindsay looked similar. Same blonde hair, same sharp features, but their personalities were completely different. Emily was more grounded, less dramatic. What are you doing here? I asked as I walked up. She folded her arms. I just got off the phone with Lindsay. That explained the expression on her face, concern mixed with irritation. And, I said, she told me you just let her leave. I unlocked the front door. I didn't physically escort her out, I said calmly. But yes. Emily followed me inside. Daniel, what the hell is going on? I set my keys on the counter. She said you didn't even try to stop her. That's true. Emily stared at me like I had just admitted something insane. Most husbands would fight for their marriage. I met her eyes. Most husbands don't already know their wife is sleeping with someone else. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Emily's expression froze. What? I walked over to the kitchen table where my laptop sat. I didn't find out last night, I said. I found out 3 weeks ago. Her voice dropped. Lindsay told me you two were just growing apart. I opened the folder Mark had sent me. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm sure that's the version she prefers. Emily slowly stepped closer. What are you saying? I turned to the laptop so she could see the screen. Ryan's messages filled the display. Hotel reservations, photos, conversations that clearly crossed every boundary a marriage had. Emily covered her mouth with one hand. Oh my God. She scrolled through several screenshots in stunned silence. Then she looked up at me. How long has this been going on? About 2 months, I said. Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. She told me she met Ryan recently. I shook my head. They've been seeing each other for a while. Emily looked back down at the screen. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. Daniel, Lindsay thinks Ryan is serious about her. I know. She thinks they're starting a real relationship. I leaned back in the chair. She's wrong. Emily frowned. What do you mean? For a moment, I debated whether to tell her everything Mark had uncovered. Then I realized something. If anyone was going to get the truth to Lindsay, it probably wasn't going to be me. Emily, I said quietly. Yeah, the guy your sister ran off with. I turned the laptop toward her again and opened Ryan's background report. Is not the person she thinks he is.